Have you ever complained about your taxi driver taking the scenic route? Well, imagine living in 19th century China, where your taxi had fur, hooves, and a bad attitude. Because before cars, China already had a booming ride-sharing industry, powered by humans, horses, and sometimes sheep. Yep, the history of Chinese taxis is way older and weirder than you might think. Part 1. The original Uber, the rickshaw era. Long before engines and rideshare apps, there was the rickshaw, the human-powered taxi that changed urban life in China. It actually came from Japan in the 1870s and quickly rolled into cities like Shanghai. People called it the foreign carriage, or East Ocean cart. At first, it looked simple: 2 wheels, 1 puller, and 1 or 2 passengers. But in 1879, the Qing government decided that men and women sitting together was far too scandalous. So, a new law was passed: no mixed gender passengers. Which seems like it would have been a pain for date nights. Also, 1 poor guy pulling 2 people? Morally improper and physically exhausting. So that was banned too. Well, maybe that's at least a win for the poor rickshaw puller. Part 2. The science behind the sweat. Think about this. People have been living in China for a few thousand years, and they had carts. So why did it take until the 1870s for the rickshaw to appear? Well, rickshaws, it turns out, are surprisingly high-tech. They needed steel springs for shock absorption, rubber tires to survive bumpy roads, and ball bearings for balance, so the poor guy pulling it didn't collapse halfway through. Without those, every ride would have felt like a 2-hour earthquake on wheels. So yes, before there were Teslas, there were tech-shaws. And they thrived in cities like Shanghai, because they were some of the only places with real paved roads, essential for comfort and travel. Part 3. Enter the real taxi. The first actual taxi company appeared in Harbin in 1903, and by 1908 Shanghai had its own American-run company called Global Department Store Taxi Service. By 1928, the city had over 40 taxi companies and over 500 cars, which sounds pretty impressive for the time, until you learn they shared the streets with 20,000 rickshaws. Why? Because Ford cars cost about 12,000 silver coins, while a rickshaw cost only 50. Also, fuel, training, and maintenance were a nightmare in a country where 90% of people couldn't read. Teaching someone to drive then was like training a pilot today. So rickshaws still ruled the road. They were cheap, everywhere, and could go places cars simply couldn't, like the narrow streets and back alleys of Shanghai. Part 4. License wars and strikes. Even back then, taxi drivers had to pay daily fees to their companies, the original commission cut. Some had to give half their earnings back every day. Licenses were really expensive too. In 1924, the Shanghai Municipal Council charged 2 silver coins per license, but speculators resold them for 750 silver coins. Talk about a bull market. And yes, labor protests happened even then. In 1929, when Beijing introduced electric streetcars, rickshaw drivers were furious. Fares were 60% cheaper and businesses tanked. So one day, they snapped, stormed the streets, and smashed 2/3 of the city's streetcars in what became known as the Rickshaw Riot. Part 5. The Last Ride. Eventually, technology won. By the late 1940s, the humble rickshaw was replaced by tricycle taxis. And by the 1950s, buses and bicycles took over city transport. Shanghai officially retired its last rickshaw in 1955, sending it to a museum. But in the 1960s and 70s, there was one nostalgic comeback. A tiny 3-wheeled gas-powered taxi called the Little Turtle Car. It looked adorable until you realised it was powered by a 12-horsepower engine that screamed louder than its passengers. Still, it cost only a third of a real taxi ride, so it became the poor man's chariot. And by the 1980s, the China we know today, with proper taxis, meters, and traffic jams, was born. So, next time your cab is a little late or taking the long way home, just remember, you could have been riding in a shaky wooden cart through mud, pulled by a guy who's also filing a noise complaint against electric trams. From rickshaws to little turtles and beyond, China's taxi story proves one thing. Technology may change, but humans will always find new ways to complain about the ride.